This 23-year-old girl who escaped her war-torn home country to start a new life in the United States is dead. She was murdered on a public light rail train in Charlotte, North Carolina in a shocking attack, an unprovoked attack, according to police, by a man with a lengthy criminal record. The murder of Iryna Zarutska is causing outrage nationally and internationally, and the suspect's mom is now speaking out why she says her son should never have been allowed into the community. We're on the case, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. It is hard to comprehend how this young woman's life came to an end. She escapes her home country where she worried about the threats of drone strikes and bombs, only to be killed on public transportation in the United States. Her name is Iryna Zarutska. She was just 23 years old. She came to the US with her mom, her brother, and her sister to escape the war in Ukraine. Her obituary describes her as a talented artist with a deep love of animals. She actually dreamed of becoming a vet, and she embraced the American dream of what her life could be in this country, like so many people who come from somewhere else and land on American soil and hope for a better life. She actually learned English in a very short time, but she wouldn't be able to see those dreams become reality because of what happened on August 22nd on board a Charlotte City light rail train. It was around 10 p.m. Now, this is a screenshot of the video that has been released by Charlotte's Transit Authority of the unprovoked attack that ended her life. And I know this image is so difficult to look at. The man now charged with her murder is a career criminal. The video of him allegedly stabbing Zarutska coming to light, along with his criminal record, that has sparked a lot of anger. Now, I'll tell you how many years he's already spent in prison and what his mom is now saying in just a moment. His name is Decarlos Brown. Now let's talk about what happened though on August 22nd before we get to that, around 10 p.m. on board the light rail train. This is video per WCNC in Charlotte of Zarutska boarding the light rail and sitting down right in front of the man now accused of her murder. Brown is there in the red hoodie. These two did not know each other according to police, and they had zero interaction, police say, before this murder. Now Zarutska was just getting off work at a local pizza spot in Charlotte, North Carolina, and she was just trying to catch a ride home. Now, I am stepping away from the video here for this moment just to warn you of what happens next. I'm not going to show you the moment that Zarutska is stabbed, but you will see everything that leads up to it. It is difficult to watch. This video was released to Charlotte local media. It's about 4 minutes after Zarutska boarded the train that Decarlos Brown pulls out what appears to be a pocket knife and stabs her 3 times. Brown then walks away as the young girl falls to the ground. Police say she was dead on scene. Brown was arrested a short time later and is now charged with first-degree murder. Charlotte authorities say there was no security guard on board the train at the time Zarutska was murdered. They have security on these trains, but they more patrol the area, not sit in a specific spot. Brown had previously served 5 years in prison for robbery with a dangerous weapon in 2014. He also has 14 prior arrests. WSOC TV said he was homeless. His mom told that TV station that he was diagnosed with schizophrenia. His mom talked to this reporter from this TV station in Charlotte and said, quote, "What he did was atrocious. It was horrible and it was wrong." She said she does not want to make it out that her son is a victim in this case, though she does say the system failed him. She said that when he got out of prison, he started saying weird things and he became more aggressive. She actually got a voluntary commitment order from the courts. His mom said that she had to kick him out of her house because he was getting violent. But then here is a moment that so many people are focusing on right now. It happened in January of this year. Brown wanted police to investigate, quote, "man-made materials in his body that controlled his functions." He was upset when police said there was nothing they could do to help him, so he called 911, and that's where he got in trouble. He was charged with misuse of the 911 system. But this is an important part to this story. WSOC reports that Magistrate Judge Teresa Stokes released Brown from jail despite him being homeless and having a history of mental health issues along with that criminal record, and she released him because he gave a, quote, "written promise that he would appear." Now, this is a picture of Stokes per her LinkedIn, which does seem to be deactivated now since her name has become the target of many people who are upset with her decision in this case. Brown's mom told the reporter with WSOC that her son should never have been released into the community because of his criminal history as well as his diagnosed mental health issues. Brown is expected, now charged with first-degree murder, to be in court on September 19th. As for the family of the Ukrainian girl who came to this country with hopes of a better, safer life, a girl who learned the language and was coming home from working a night at a pizza place with dreams of being a functioning member of society. She was laid to rest in North Carolina, and according to the New York Post, her dad could not attend the funeral because he is still in Ukraine and cannot leave because of wartime rules. In putting this story together, I typed Decarlos Brown's name into truthfinder.com. We found his profile and we also saw a lengthy criminal record. At Law&Crime, we partner with Truthfinder and we use it to get details on the people involved in our stories. But even if you don't work in true crime, it can be an excellent resource to give you some peace of mind as it's one of the largest public record search services in the United States. And with the paid subscription service, you get access to unlimited reports about almost anyone. And right now, you can get 50% off your first month of confidential background reports. Just go to truthfinder.com/OTC. Joining us now from Charlotte, North Carolina to talk a little bit more about this case is Jason St. Aubin from Marsiliot and Mills, criminal defense attorney. Thank you for taking the time to be with us on Law and Crime, because I know this story very big internationally in a lot of ways, but certainly in your city. As someone who's in the city where all of this is going down, and there's a lot of conversation all over the place beyond Charlotte related to this story, what would you say is the conversation people should be having when it comes to this case?
Well, thank y'all for having me, Chris. The Hornets' home is abuzz with talk about this really tragic case. And what I would say is that there's a lot of layers and levels to the discussion that we are all having here about this tragic circumstance. There are various sides to this issue. There's the side that the graphic footage that is displayed is everybody's worst nightmare. Somebody being stabbed without provocation, without even eye contact, in cold blood by somebody who is violent and is now incarcerated. There's the other side of the story, though, which is that person has a backstory of their own and that they have been through the criminal justice system in our city, and in some ways that system had opportunities to help them address needs that never got addressed. And those are needs I'm very familiar with, having worked here, today being my 20th year of practicing law in the city. So it is something that there are various sides, but the one I know best is working with people just like Mr. Brown, who have struggled with schizophrenia and mental health issues throughout their lives and throughout their time in the justice system.
And looking at this suspect, and before we get to kind of the backstory on him, he's now facing first-degree murder charges. His mom has said he's diagnosed schizophrenic. How could that mental health diagnosis factor into how he's prosecuted in this case?
Oh, heavily. It is a situation where the fundamental bedrock and foundation of our criminal laws allow for things even as early as the 1800s for insanity pleas and pleas that are due to, not guilty pleas, that are due to mental defects that occur. This is not a new phenomenon, and it is something that really can factor in to a lot of different activities that could be criminalized. We oftentimes in law look to the mindset of a person involved in the death of another. And on a basic level, an example would be we punish the person who drives drunk and kills someone behind the wheel much worse than we do the person who dropped their phone on the floor that they weren't using and reached for it. The mindset of those two people are different. One is putting a lot of people in danger, and the other could be something that is innocuous but then just leads to somebody being tragically killed. So the same reasons we look to the mindset of somebody in this situation, it won't excuse their conduct. It will not take away from the criminal nature of it, but it could certainly change the way that the case is approached.
Because when you look at his criminal history, and he served, I believe it was 5 years in prison for an armed robbery conviction, and then you have from January of this year a mental health episode, it seems, where he was calling 911. He ends up getting charged for that. And then it leads to this moment that's getting a lot of attention where there's a magistrate judge who says because of a written promise, he's allowed to go on bond. I know that Decarlos Brown's mom has said to Decarlos, to a local TV station, she doesn't believe that he should have been out in public. What do you make of that judge's decision to let, this written promise to let him go out, considering that he was homeless and also was dealing with schizophrenia and some violent behavior?
It's really important when making judgments about a situation like this that we take a hard look at the nuances of that situation, because here's what it really is. This is someone who called 911 and who told them that forces unknown, agents were messing with him. Someone who's clearly sick. That misuse of a 911 call was a cry for help and attention that this person is severely mentally ill. And if our answer as a society would be that we needed to keep that person in custody for 8 months, because this occurred in January and he was released in January, if our answer is that, then we have a fundamental issue with how we're treating people who are mentally ill, because of several reasons. One would be, we don't have the resources to keep somebody in custody who has not committed any act of violence other than calling 911 about their mental illness. The other issue that we're facing that's really essential to this discussion, besides the idea that we can't keep somebody in custody for 8 months, our jail is more dangerous potentially for that person to be in than it would be for them to be outside receiving care. In our jail, people don't get the mental health care that they need effectively sometimes, and in the last month alone, 3 people have died in our jail in 1 month, and 18 people have died in our jail since 2019. So there would be no effective means or no solution that would be able to be done that would require incarcerating somebody for 8 months, number one, on a misdemeanor charge that at most can carry just a couple of months in jail, and number two, a charge that the needs that it was addressed to weren't really being taken care of at all by the imprisonment, I guess, for lack of a better term.
What can be, right now in Charlotte, North Carolina, because ultimately it leads to this point where someone who, he has a criminal record, he clearly has a very dangerous mental health diagnosis, and he's on this train and he has a knife, and for whatever reason is going on in his mind, he decides to, according to the video we've seen, commit this crime. What type of mental health resource is there to prevent Decarlos Brown from being on this collision course with this young woman and having this moment where he commits this crime?
Chris, I'm so glad that you asked that, because my work in Charlotte has mainly been on behalf of people who are accused of violent felonies that have severe mental health conditions. And this is a topic that I have been working on for the better part of a decade. What I can tell you is that at times there have been various resources that have been set aside or earmarked or put towards the programs that might help mentally ill people. There was a time where a mentally ill client of mine really needed assistance, and he was given an opportunity in one county to do probation, and I was working really hard to find solutions or places that could treat him and treat his mental illness. And what I was told at that time a few years ago was that there was not a single resource in the state that could help him address those needs, because either they weren't geared towards his level of supervision that was necessary, or they weren't programs that had space available. So we have that issue. We have an issue of $100 million of federal funding was taken away from the state in March of this year. That was all towards mental health, and that could have been used towards programs that can help people in need of mental health assistance. This is a tragedy. An immigrant who came here who had done no wrong and had only tried to live the best life that she could in a new country was brutally and awfully killed. There's no way around that. And the person who did it should be held responsible. There's no way around that either. It needs to happen. But what can happen, hopefully, and may come out of this, is a real talk about how we divert resources to potentially create situations where we can keep this from occurring again. That's the important thing.
You know, and I hear you say, like, for your clients too, and you know, it sounds just how fortunate for a client to have, and I'm not just saying this, but like a lawyer like you who is working to find mental health resources for a client. And I don't know who Decarlos Brown's lawyer was, but to have someone who has schizophrenia, lengthy criminal record, has had issues with the law in the past. His mom kicked him out of his own house because she was concerned about his violent behavior. Say there are even those types of resources available to help him. How can things be done to ensure that he would actually go and get those resources when in reality, locking him up, you know, it's just not going to be a reality of just taking every person who has schizophrenia and putting them behind bars. But then you put them out into the public where they could have a mental episode and this happens. How do they actually end up going and making sure they go to the counseling and getting all the resources they need?
And that is a very important, lengthy, and very complicated discussion that I think we all need to have. I think that our perception as a society is a good one, because when tragedy strikes, a lot of times our initial impulse is to think, well, is that person ill? Do they have issues? And the conversation has gradually shifted towards seeing that headline in the news when it's an act of violence, and at least having that thought in the back of our minds that that person may have some illness. Then the question becomes, how do we address it? Do we address it through lengthy incarceration, by keeping that person away from the rest of society? Do we address it by bringing in more policing resources? I will tell you, in my experience as a defense attorney dealing with people who are mentally ill, who are accused of and have committed crimes of violence, no amount of policing is going to change those types of things. And here's why I say that. I represented a man who was accused of going into a home improvement store and pulling tools and things off of the rack and assaulting a complete stranger in broad daylight, nearly to death. That's not something that police or military can fix. It's something that medication, treatment, early intervention, and continued exposure to professionals can help with. And I think in order to get these folks on board, they kind of have to have enough resources around them that when they start to fall off the wagon, they are pulled back in. That there are courts, treatment courts, that will hold them accountable if they decide that they will not stop taking, that they will stop taking medication. That there are officials and people in law enforcement that are well versed in mental health, that their job is to try to work with people and have programs that involve cooperation with law enforcement and making sure that they check in with people and work towards goals of medication and treatment. One of these things is these folks have very limited resources and they find themselves homeless. Once they're homeless, it's very hard to organize them and to divert them to the programs that they need or ensure their attendance. And if they're placed in jail for something like misusing the 911 system, I don't think we'll ever get to a point where as a society we say, well, that person is going to be flagged to stay here for much longer than a misdemeanor crime can even punish them for. I've had cases in North Carolina where my clients have waited over 6 years before they've been able to be declared able to proceed by the court system. These folks sat in solitary isolation with no trial, with no access to the outside world, and with very little support in a cell by themselves for many hours at a time, and it's caused irreparable damage to their future. So I would just say that there are a lot of ins and outs to this, but nobody deserves to be attacked, hurt, or harmed by somebody who is ill at all. So we have to find a solution that fits.
Yeah, because I think too, and it's also important to know. I mean, I know of people who have schizophrenia and they live very normal lives and they're not assaulting people and I think that is an important point. I do, as someone who's not a lawyer, and look, I just sit back and I can see the story kind of playing out, and you do go to this written note, and like my mind keeps going back to it, and I just think about in that moment, here's a judge looking at 14 criminal cases that this person's had. He certainly served his time in prison. He wasn't out on parole. I mean, like he that's what prison is. You go to prison, you serve your time, and then you move on with your life. And then he has this episode. Like, what more could have been done in that moment by that judge, though? Because it does seem like someone who has more than a dozen criminal cases, they haven't exactly followed the law throughout their life. To then say a written note that you're going to appear is something that would actually hold up. I can see why people would look at that and say it feels a little hollow.
So let's play this story out, and let me play devil's advocate for it.
Sure.
So this idea is this person comes in, no matter how many criminal convictions they have, they're being arrested, they're being taken in for calling 911 and saying, I'm delusional, basically. I have mental health problems. They are not attacking anyone, assaulting anyone, causing property damage, stealing. They are calling the authorities and telling them basically that they are sick. If those authorities don't address the sickness, it shouldn't be up to that judge to then be the one that fixes it. So that's the first step. The second step would be when that plays out in any court, in any system in our country, that type of crime, it's not violent, it's not a felony. Within a month or two, that person's going to have an attorney appointed to their case who's likely to bring them into court, and they're going to plead to time served, and they're going to get back out on the street because that's a misdemeanor. And if we keep that person in custody for a year or longer just because they've exhibited signs of mental illness, then what we've created is a system that's not going to help solve that problem. So I think it all boils down to, in this situation, it's very easy to say if this person were in custody, none of this would have happened. But the truth of it is that that person would not have been held in custody for 8 months. This occurred in August. This person was put in jail in January. Under no scenario at all would that person, for this type of offense, have ever been held for 7 months. The most you can be punished for a misdemeanor crime in North Carolina is, I believe it's 180 days. It might even be 150 days. I practice all felonies, so I very rarely get a misdemeanor. But what I would tell you is that time frame is going to have elapsed and expired, and that person will be back out on the street. So it's not up to the judges and the folks to hold them on minor crimes forever into perpetuity, because there's always going to be somebody who slips through that crack, who we hold them for the max. They get out, and then they haven't been given any tools to succeed, and then something like this happens immediately again. It's up to us that when the flags are there, that we figure out the right resources to keep that person away. Policing will help, though. I do want to be clear that I'm not trying to see this through a narrow lens and not be objective about what we need to do as a society. I see this as if we police the light rail and people who don't have a ticket are gotten off immediately, or there's a better way of screening to make sure that dangerous or violent people don't enter that property, just like it would be if I went to an airport with a knife. I mean, there's something to be said about those kind of things. There's something to be said about being proactive. So nobody's saying we just need to wait until this tragedy occurs again. No one is saying that. But I think being proactive involves being decisive about how we use the resources we have. And I think it's the knee-jerk reaction in a country where we imprison more people than any other nation in the world is, let's just lean on that. And I don't think that scenario is feasible in this particular situation, just given what this person was charged with.
No, and I think that's important context, especially when you think of the timeline of this 911 call charge that he was facing from back in January. Just finally, Jason, and you deal, and you're a great person to talk to with this because you do deal with these cases involving mental health that become often this flashpoint in the country. And like one thing with I just kind of feel like as a viewer in a lot of ways of like how this plays out, like when people talk about mental health, maybe they're a politician, maybe they're, a defense attorney or a, district attorney or something. It just seems like this kind of footnote to the conversation where a tragedy happens and then someone says we need better mental health services and everybody's like, that sounds like a good idea, and everybody claps and it's cute, and then we move on. and then we forget about it. Then we have another conversation like this and we say, wouldn't it be great to have a conversation about mental health? Everybody claps, we move on, then the next tragedy continues to happen. How do we actually get to a point where there are better mental health services for people, as opposed to it just being this very nice thing that someone says at like a luncheon that everybody claps about?
It makes me very emotional, but that client I mentioned earlier, the one who I went and looked for mental health resources for, I scoured the state and I asked everybody I could, where can we place this fella? I had to leave that case when I went to private practice, and who took it over ended up putting him in a situation where he went to prison. He didn't have to go long. He had been waiting a long time through the system and being treated for his mental illness and being prepared to actually go to court. He only had about a year left to go, and during that year, he killed himself. And it's really difficult for me to talk about. So I see this on a daily basis. I see it through our system. It's a through line that families deal with on the street, who are dealing with their children, processing these problems, but it's also something that this young woman, she's gone far too soon and far too violently in a way that no one would wish on anyone. And, if it takes tragedy in the jail, in the prison, on the street, it seems like that's sometimes the only thing that will open people's eyes to the fact that, we need to not just be tough or come down with a hammer, but we need a chisel. We need to really look at where we can do the most impact as a society, where we can put people in positions where they're not only safe from harm and that they're protected by law enforcement, but also where other people are in a position that law enforcement and the system will be working to make sure that they get the resources and structure they need put in place, as opposed to just putting them in the corner until something like this happens, because that you can't sweep this issue under the rug. Eventually, this type of tragedy is going to happen again. So I do think that this is the kind of thing that does what you're suggesting. It has done that in the city. It is something that has captivated and captured all of us. It is something that has sparked discussions and debate from both sides about how to best suit the needs of people. There's a light rail stop that the window that I'm facing right now faces the stop on the light rail, right outside the building that houses my office, and I see it all the time, every day. My elderly parents took the light rail to meet me for dinner the day after this happened, and they were a little shaken by it. It's something that we need to address as a community, but we also need to be smart about how we address it.
No, and I really appreciate the conversation. Really good context, because I know it's a story that's has a lot of passion, let's just say, on all sides of it. Jason St. Aubin, criminal defense attorney from Charlotte, North Carolina. Thank you for joining us on Law and Crime. We really appreciate it.
Hey, thanks, Chris. I appreciate that.
That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law and Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.